A 13-year-old girl came home with two newborn babies. Her mother immediately called 911. The heavy rain pounded fiercely against the roof. Mary's small house was still lit, but the atmosphere inside was suffocating and terrifying. The door swung open so hard it slammed into the wall. A 13-year-old girl burst into the house, her eyes wide with horror. Her clothes were torn to shreds, covered in mud and blood. In her arms were two newborn babies, red and fragile, their cries so faint they seemed like they could be swept away by the wind at any moment. "Lucy!" Mary screamed, stunned by the scene before her. Lucy trembled, her whole body ice-cold. She held the two babies tightly, trying to shield them from the cold wind blowing in through the door that hadn't yet been closed. "Mom! Mom!" Her voice cracked, as if she was about to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Mary rushed forward, pulling her daughter into her arms, but immediately, a foul, metallic stench hit her nose. She instinctively pulled back a little, her hands shaking as she looked down at Lucy's shirt. It wasn't only stained with the blood of the two babies but also had dark brown streaks of dried blood. "Lucy, are you hurt?" Mary quickly grabbed her daughter's arms, her voice breaking with fear. Lucy shook her head, her lips pale. She clutched the two babies even tighter, as if letting go of them would make them disappear. "It's not me, it's Emma." Mary froze. Her heart skipped a beat. "Emma? Emma who? What are you talking about?" Lucy looked at her mother, her eyes brimming with tears but refusing to fall. She started trembling even harder. "Mom, call the police." The sound of police sirens pierced through the dark night, shattering the eerily quiet neighborhood. Inside the small living room, Officer Charles Mitchell and two subordinates were assessing the situation. A young female officer, Valerie Sanders, was examining the two newborn babies. "They're still very weak. We need to get them to the hospital immediately," Valerie said, gently picking up one of the babies. Mary stood nearby, still unable to believe what was happening. "Lucy, tell me clearly, what happened? Where were you? Where did all this blood come from?" Lucy lowered her head, her small hands clutching at the hem of her shirt, her fingers pale and bloodless. I don't really remember." Charles Mitchell frowned, his gaze sharp. "Where did you find these two babies?" Lucy pressed her lips together, her whole body shrinking in on itself. "I don't remember." Charles exchanged a glance with Valerie, then gave her a signal. Valerie sat down and gently touched Lucy's hand. "You don't have to be afraid. Everyone here just wants to protect you." Lucy looked up at Valerie, her breathing quick and shallow. Finally, she bit her lip and spoke through her trembling. "At the abandoned warehouse near the southern road." Mary immediately froze. "You went there alone. Why did you go there?" Lucy didn't answer. She stayed silent, her eyes empty. Charles exchanged another look with Valerie, then pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, send a unit to the abandoned warehouse near the southern road. We may have a crime scene." At the old warehouse, the police flashlights scanned over cracked, damp walls. The metallic scent of fresh blood still lingered in the air. A young officer doubled over and vomited violently as soon as he stepped inside. Oh God! In front of them, a horrifying scene unfolded. Blood was smeared across the floor, the stains dragging in streaks like signs of a desperate struggle. On the walls, tiny handprints were pressed into the old bricks, as if someone had tried to fight free. And in the center of the room, a girl was tied tightly to a wooden chair. Her hair hung down, her face pale. Her eyes stared wide open, still frozen in fear. Charles clenched his fists, his voice lowering. "How old is the victim?" An officer checked the documents they'd found nearby. "Name's Emma Foster. 16 years old." Suddenly, another officer shouted. "Sir! Come look at this." Charles quickly stepped over. When the flashlight beam illuminated the area, something small and shiny in the victim's hand made him pause. It was a silver necklace. Charles carefully picked it up and turned to Valerie. "Look at this. It seems like someone tried to rip this necklace off her but couldn't." A broken voice came from behind them. That's Emma's." Everyone turned around. Mary stood frozen at the entrance to the warehouse, her face ghostly pale. "Your niece?" Valerie asked. Mary burst into tears, stepping forward and gently reaching out to touch the necklace. "I gave it to her, for her birthday last year." The atmosphere seemed to freeze. Charles clenched his fists and turned to his subordinates. "Who did this?" A young officer ran over, his voice panicked. "We found strange footprints near the back door, possibly the suspects." Charles narrowed his eyes and looked back at Valerie. "We need to find out who's behind this. Immediately." Valerie nodded, her eyes sharp as ice. In the corner of the room, Lucy clutched the hem of her shirt, her lips trembling. She stared at Emma's lifeless body, then whispered, barely audible. "I'm sorry. Emma." Cold wind whistled through the cracks of the old warehouse. The metallic stench of blood still lingered in the air, making the officers nearby feel sick. Charles Mitchell stood tall, his sharp eyes scanning every trace left in the room. Around him, Valerie Sanders and a few other officers were taking notes and photographing the scene. "This wasn't just a simple murder," Charles said, his voice low. Valerie nodded, kneeling beside Emma's body, her expression darkening. "The girl's wrists have deep ligature marks. It shows the suspect kept her tied up for quite a while." A young officer, Robert Pierce, spoke up nervously. "And those handprints on the walls. It looks like she tried to crawl out of here." Charles clenched his fists tighter. "She didn't just try to crawl out. Emma fought for her life, but she didn't win." Mary trembled, her hands gripping the doorframe. "Oh God, Emma." Lucy stood in silence, her eyes empty as if her mind had been locked away in a horrifying memory. Charles approached, lowering himself to Lucy's eye level, his voice gentle but firm. "Lucy, you were here when this happened, weren't you?" Lucy bit her lip, her hands shaking. I don't want to remember." Charles exchanged a look with Valerie, then turned back to Lucy, his voice deeper. "You may not want to remember, but the truth won't change. If you don't speak, the evil one is still out there." Lucy took a shaky breath. Finally, she spoke, her voice breaking. "Emma called me that night. She said someone was watching her." Valerie narrowed her eyes. "Who?" Lucy shook her head. "Emma didn't say a name. But she was really scared. She said she was going to run away, and then, she disappeared." Charles frowned. "When did you come here?" Lucy bit her lip. "After I heard her screaming for help. I ran after her but when I got here, she was already dead." Charles finished for her. Lucy broke down in tears. "I was too late. I couldn't do anything to save her." Mary pulled her daughter into her arms, tears rolling down her cheeks. "No, you did everything you could. You saved the two babies." Charles clenched his fists again, his gaze burning with anger. "Was anyone else at the scene when you arrived?" Lucy nodded, but her voice trembled as she answered. "James Grayson." The air seemed to freeze over. Robert instinctively tightened his grip on the gun at his waist, his expression tense. "James Grayson? He's still not in custody." Charles narrowed his eyes, his voice cold as steel. "I thought he disappeared after the assault case last year." Valerie stared hard at Lucy, her voice turning more serious. "Are you sure? You saw James Grayson here?" Lucy nodded firmly, tears streaming down her face. He was standing right there." He looked at me and said he'd kill me if I told anyone. Mary went rigid, holding Lucy tightly, her whole body trembling with fear. Oh God! James Grayson! Charles gritted his teeth and pulled out his radio. Dispatch, I need an emergency warrant for James Grayson. He may be connected to Emma Foster's murder and a human trafficking ring. A voice crackled back through the radio. Understood, Detective Mitchell. We'll proceed immediately. Robert turned to Charles, his voice tense. Sir, if James really is behind this, he won't stop. He'll come after those 2 babies. Mary clutched the babies in her arms, her hands ice cold. No. No way. He can't take them back. Valerie nodded, her eyes sharp as blades. Then we have to stop him before it's too late. Charles looked around the crime scene one more time, his eyes cold as ice. This time, he won't get away. That night, the police deployed teams to hunt for James Grayson. The streets of the city were flooded with the flashing lights of police cars, sirens wailing through the darkness. At the police station, Lucy sat in the interrogation room, her hands clutching a cup of hot tea. Her eyes were still haunted by the horrific memories. Valerie stepped inside, gently pulling out a chair and sitting down across from her. Lucy, you were very brave to tell us everything. Lucy looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. But, will he come for me? Valerie gave her a soft smile, but her gaze was full of fierce determination. We won't let that happen. James Grayson will be caught, I promise. Lucy bit her lip but nodded. Outside the interrogation room, Charles stood with his arms crossed, watching through the glass. Robert approached him, his voice low. You think we can get him this time? Charles took a deep breath, his eyes darkening. I don't think. I know he won't get away. In the city police station's briefing room, a large map was spread across the table. Red X's circled possible locations where James Grayson could be hiding. Charles Mitchell stood in front of the table, his expression serious. James Grayson has been planning this for a long time. He didn't just kill Emma. He intended to sell those 2 babies. Robert Pierce slammed his fist on the table, his voice filled with fury. That bastard isn't just a murderer. He's a key player in a human trafficking ring. Valerie Sanders nodded, sliding a file folder toward Charles. We just received a report from Interpol. James had connections to an underground organization specializing in selling newborn babies in Central America. They forge documents, create legal families to smuggle the children overseas. Mary sat beside Lucy, holding her tightly. Her face turned pale as she listened to what was unfolding. Oh God, if Lucy hadn't gotten there in time. Charles placed his hand on the table, his eyes sharp as a blade. But Lucy did get there in time. And because of her, we saved those 2 babies. Lucy lifted her head, her eyes still full of terror. But Emma. I couldn't save her. Mary gripped her daughter's hand tightly, her voice breaking. It's not your fault, Lucy. Charles turned to Valerie. Do we have any new information on where James might be hiding? Valerie opened her laptop, pulling up a surveillance video. Yes. A witness reported seeing him near the abandoned warehouse 2 hours ago. But shortly after that, he vanished. Robert shot to his feet, his eyes blazing with anger. He's still lurking nearby. If he plans to sell the babies, he'll be trying to contact a buyer. Charles clenched his fists, his voice dropping into a growl. We have to find him before it's too late. In a dark room, the light from a cell phone screen illuminated a man's face. James Grayson. He sat with his arms crossed, his cold eyes staring at the screen where a message had just popped up. We'll meet at dawn. Be ready for the final shipment. James smirked, running a hand over his chin. They think they can catch me. He slipped the phone into his pocket and stood up, turning to a man standing nearby. Lucas Walker, a middleman in the trafficking operation. You sure everything's ready? James asked, his voice razor-sharp. Lucas nodded, tossing a stack of fake documents onto the table. I've got the forged passports ready. Tomorrow night, you'll be out of the country. James chuckled darkly, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it. They can find that body, but they won't stop me from getting rich. Lucas glanced at James, a hint of worry in his eyes. But the cops know you're involved in this. If they catch you, it's over. James exhaled a long stream of smoke, his voice dropping lower. That's why I won't let them catch me. Lucas said nothing, but he knew one thing for sure. James Grayson wasn't the kind of man who was easy to catch. The police hunted James through the night, but he always stayed one step ahead. In Mary's apartment, the air was thick with tension. Lucy sat curled up on the couch, her eyes hollow, as if her mind was still trapped in that warehouse. Mary gently stroked her daughter's hair, her voice soft. You need to get some sleep, Lucy. Lucy looked at her mother, her lips barely moving. If I close my eyes, I'll see her again. Mary squeezed her daughter's hand, tears streaming down her face. I know. I know you're scared, but you have to believe everything will be okay. At that moment, Mary's phone started to vibrate. She jumped, glancing down at the screen. Unknown number. Mary hesitated, but then she pressed the answer button. Hello. A deep, cold male voice came through the line. I know what Lucy told the police. Mary froze. Who is this? James Grayson. Her grip tightened on the phone, her entire body going cold. What do you want? James let out a low chuckle. Just to remind you of something, Mary. Mary clutched Lucy's hand tightly, her heart pounding wildly. Don't you dare touch my daughter. James sneered, his voice lowering, every word like a blade. If Lucy doesn't want to end up like Emma, she'd better keep her mouth shut. Beep, beep, beep. The call ended. Mary shot to her feet, panic flooding her expression. We have to get out of here right now. Lucy stared in fear. Mom! What's happening? Mary tried to dial the police, but her hands shook so badly she couldn't press the buttons correctly. We're not safe. James knows everything. Outside the apartment, a black car sat hidden in the shadows, engine running. James Grayson was watching them. Mary's hands trembled as she set the phone down. James Grayson had called. That meant he was close, watching them. We have to go. Now. Mary gripped Lucy's hand tightly and pulled her to her feet. Lucy panicked, her eyes wide with fear. Mom! What's going on? Mary swallowed hard, her voice urgent. James knows you talked to the police. He just called me. He threatened you. Lucy stood there frozen, her entire body numb. No. No, it can't be, how does he know? Outside the window, the black car still waited in the darkness. Its engine idled quietly, and behind the wheel, James Grayson was watching them. He smirked and pulled out his phone, typing a series of numbers. Looks like the girl and her mother are planning to run. Follow them. Less than a minute later, a message flashed back. Understood. We'll handle it. James chuckled coldly, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. You can run all you want, Lucy. It won't matter. Inside the apartment, Mary frantically called Charles Mitchell, her voice shaking with fear. Charles. He knows. He called and threatened me and Lucy. Charles shot up from his chair, his eyes darkening. Mary, listen to me. You and Lucy do not leave the house. I'm coming right now. But. No buts. Officers will be there to protect you both immediately. Mary took a shuddering breath and held Lucy close. Okay, but please, hurry. Charles hung up and turned to Valerie. We have to move. If James knows Lucy talked, he won't let her live. Valerie nodded, drawing her gun, her voice firm. I'm coming with you. Robert stood as well, his eyes filled with concern. I'll call for backup. We can't let James slip away. In the small apartment, Mary locked every door, pulled all the curtains shut, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Lucy clung tightly to her mother's hand, her voice small. Mom, is he coming? It's okay, sweetheart, the police are on their way. But at that moment. Crash. The window shattered into pieces. Mary screamed, dragging Lucy backward. From the darkness, two masked men burst into the apartment, knives in hand. Give us the girl, one of them roared. Lucy cried out in terror, clinging to her mother. Mary screamed, fighting back. What do you want? The other man stepped forward, his eyes cold and sharp. James sends his regards. Bam! The sound of police sirens blared nearby. The two masked men cursed under their breath and immediately turned to run. Mary clutched Lucy tightly, both of them trembling as police officers stormed into the house. Charles drew his gun and shouted. Stop! Police! Gunshots rang out. The first man went down, blood pouring from his shoulder. The other jumped through the window, trying to escape. Robert chased after him, cocking his gun. Stop! But the man was too fast. Charles shouted, Get him! A loud screech of tires cut through the night. James Grayson's black car came roaring up, scooping up his accomplice in one swift motion. The man leapt into the vehicle, and in an instant, James slammed the gas pedal and vanished into the darkness. Robert slammed his hand hard against the hood of the car as it sped away, his teeth clenched. Damn it! He got away again. Charles clenched his fists tightly, his eyes burning with fury. But at least we kept Lucy safe. In the wrecked living room, Mary held Lucy tightly in her arms. Lucy sobbed uncontrollably, her entire body shaking. Mom! I don't want to die. Mary broke down crying, pulling her daughter closer. No one is going to hurt you, no one. Charles stepped forward, his voice low but firm. Mary, you and Lucy need protection. We're placing you both into the witness protection program immediately. Mary looked up at him, her eyes still full of fear. But what about James? He's still out there. Charles narrowed his eyes, his tone unwavering. We'll catch him. No matter what it takes. Valerie placed a gentle hand on Lucy's shoulder, speaking softly. You're very brave, Lucy. But from now on, you need to be even stronger. Can you do that? Lucy looked at Valerie, tears still streaming down her face, but she nodded. I'll try. Charles tightened his grip on his gun, his eyes darkening. Get ready. This fight isn't over. In a small room at the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, a heavy tension hung in the air. On the walls were photographs of James Grayson and a mass of documents about human trafficking, plastered everywhere. Charles Mitchell stood in front of a large map, gripping a marker tightly, his eyes sharp and cold. James isn't just a murderer. He's a key player in a sophisticated human trafficking network. Robert Pierce nodded, his voice tense. We're not dealing with a lone criminal. If we want to take James down, we need to dismantle the entire operation. Valerie Sanders entered the room, carrying a thick folder in her arms. I just got this report from Interpol. Take a look. She placed the file on the table and opened to the first page. Criminal file, Genesis Syndicate, an organization specializing in kidnapping young women, forcing them into pregnancy, and selling their newborns overseas. Active in Mexico, Central America, and Colombia. They use forged documents to make the trafficking of children appear legal. James Grayson was one of their recruiters, abducting women for the syndicate. Mary sat next to Lucy, gripping her daughter's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Oh God! He wasn't just going to sell those 2 babies, there are others. Lucy shivered, her voice dropping to a whisper. Emma was kidnapped because she knew too much. Charles clenched his fists, his voice heavy with anger. Then we end this. If we don't, more people will end up like Emma. Robert looked around the room, his expression grave. Do we have any leads on where this syndicate is operating from? Valerie pointed at a location on the map. An abandoned mansion on the outskirts of the city. According to an informant, it might be where James and his crew are hiding. Charles narrowed his eyes, his gaze razor-sharp. Then we're going in. At the police command center, Charles stood in front of a group of officers, holding a blueprint of the mansion. We'll split into 2 teams. Team 1 will breach the front entrance. Team 2 will circle around to cut off any escape routes. Robert nodded, checking his firearm. Do we have orders to take him alive, or shoot on sight? Charles looked him straight in the eye, his voice cold as steel. If he resists, you have permission to take him down. Valerie nodded, her eyes full of determination. He killed Emma. We can't let him hurt anyone else. Mary stepped forward, her voice trembling. You have to catch him. End this, please. Charles placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. I promise. Lucy looked at Charles, fear filling her eyes. Will you catch him? Charles crouched down to her level, his gaze unwavering. I don't make empty promises. I guarantee he'll never hurt anyone again. Lucy swallowed hard but nodded. I believe you. The sound of police engines roared to life. Everyone in position. Get ready to breach. At the abandoned mansion, James Grayson stood in a dark room, gripping his gun tightly. Everything's ready. Tonight, we leave. Lucas Walker entered, his expression tense. The cops are on to us. James clenched his fist, teeth gritted. Damn it. We need to get out of here now. Lucas glanced out the window, spotting a line of police lights approaching fast. The police are here. There's no time. They're already here. James raised his gun and roared. Then we fight. The police sirens were closer than ever. Outside the mansion, Charles signaled the assault team. Everyone in position. Wait for the order. Valerie gripped her gun tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. Robert clenched his fists, giving Charles a firm nod. We're ending this, right? Charles took a deep breath, his gaze sharp as a blade. We're not leaving without him. Breach. The door was kicked open. Gunshots exploded. Death was waiting for someone. The front door flew off its hinges. The police stormed in, weapons aimed at every dark corner of the abandoned mansion. Charles Mitchell led the way, his gun steady in his hands, his eyes razor-sharp. Police. Drop your weapons now. Inside, a shadow darted past. Gunfire erupted. Robert Pierce shouted. Careful. They're armed. Charles dove behind an old table, dodging bullets by inches. Valerie Sanders shouted fiercely, taking aim and firing at the shadow that had shot at them. Bang! Bang! A man groaned and fell, his gun flying from his hand. One down. Valerie shouted. Charles turned his head and ordered. Team 2. Flank the back door. Don't let anyone escape. Robert rushed toward the staircase, his gun aimed upward. Where's James? He has to be here. Suddenly, more gunshots. A bullet grazed Robert's shoulder, making him stumble back, grimacing in pain. Charles roared. He's upstairs. Move. Second floor of the mansion, James Grayson ran into a small room, yanking out his phone. I'm caught. Get me out of here now. Lucas Walker responded instantly. No time. The cops have us surrounded. James gritted his teeth, his eyes bloodshot. Damn it. Do something. Bang. The door was kicked in. Charles and Valerie charged inside. Drop the weapon, James. James spun around, his gun shaking in his hands. You can't catch me. He pulled the trigger. Charles immediately dodged to the side, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Valerie reacted instantly, taking aim and firing. Bang! James staggered, shot in the leg. He collapsed to the floor, his gun flying out of reach. Damn it! You'll pay for this. Charles stepped forward, stomping hard on his hand, gripping his gun tightly. You're the one who's going to pay, James. Robert ran in, panting heavily. We got him. Headquarters. James Grayson has been subdued. Roger that. We're sending a support team. James let out a cold laugh, his eyes filled with hatred. You can catch me, but you can't stop everything. Charles narrowed his eyes, his voice icy. We'll do more than that. Your whole network will be wiped out. Police sirens wailed as they began to raid the mansion. They couldn't run anymore. At the hospital, Mary held Lucy tightly, her tears falling onto her daughter's hair. We're safe now, sweetheart. Lucy was still trembling, but the light slowly returned to her eyes. Is he caught, Mom? Mary nodded, her voice choked with emotion. Charles caught him. He'll never hurt anyone again. Lucy took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with tears. So, it's all over. Charles stepped into the room, standing by Lucy's hospital bed. Yes. He'll pay for everything he's done. Mary turned to Charles, her voice full of gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for protecting my daughter. Charles gave a faint smile, but his eyes were still troubled. I only did what had to be done. But there are still other victims out there, we can't stop yet. Lucy looked at him, her voice soft. Emma, she can rest in peace now, right? Charles nodded, his tone lowering. Yes. And we won't let anyone else suffer like she did. At the police station, James Grayson was handcuffed, being led into the interrogation room. Charles walked in, his gaze cold as ice. You've lost, James. James looked up, smirking. You can catch me, but I'm not the only one. Charles planted both hands firmly on the table, his eyes sharp. Then watch and see. We'll wipe out this entire operation. At the city police station, Charles Mitchell stood in front of the investigation board, his gaze fierce. On the board was James Grayson's photo, along with piles of documents about the human trafficking ring. Valerie Sanders entered, holding a new file in her hands. Charles, we've just received intel. James wasn't acting alone. Charles turned around, frowning. He has an accomplice. Valerie nodded and opened the file. New file, Lucas Walker, the mastermind behind James, running the entire trafficking network. Specializes in forging documents and selling children overseas. Believed to be hiding out in a safe house. Charles clenched his fist tightly. So James was just a small pawn. We need to take down the whole system. Robert Pierce entered, holding his phone with a newly received message. Someone reported seeing Lucas Walker leaving the city. He's planning to escape. Charles gritted his teeth, his voice dropping low. We won't let him get away. Everyone ready. Deploy the special task force. At the hospital, Lucy sat curled up on the bed, her eyes red and swollen. Mary gently stroked her daughter's hair, her voice tender. Sweetheart, you did really well. Lucy shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I couldn't save Emma. If I had come sooner. Mary held her daughter tightly, choking back her tears. No, you did everything you could. Don't blame yourself anymore, Lucy. Charles walked into the room, his eyes full of understanding. Lucy, you helped us find James. Without you, he would have kept hurting more people. Lucy looked up at Charles, her voice faint. Are you sure? Charles nodded, his tone firm. I'm sure. Thanks to you, we saved 2 children and we're about to bring down the whole network. Lucy bit her lip, but she nodded. Then, promise me, catch them all. Charles smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed resolute. I promise. Police headquarters, we just received information. James is being taken out of the city. Charles spun around, his eyes darkening. Where is he going? Robert looked at the map on the screen. An unmarked truck left the city 15 minutes ago. We suspect he's inside. Valerie drew her gun, her gaze sharp. We need to intercept him immediately. Charles nodded, his voice firm. Call the patrol units. Get ready for a pursuit. All patrol units. Move out now. On the highway, sirens wailed across the entire route. Police cars chased closely behind a black truck speeding away at high velocity. Stop right now. You are surrounded. But, gunshots fired from the truck. Charles gripped the steering wheel tightly and shouted, they're resisting. Return fire. Gunshots echoed everywhere. The truck swerved wildly, trying to escape. Robert roared, they're trying to get away. Charles activated the radio, giving an order, use the roadblocks. Don't let them escape. A loud explosion. The truck crashed straight into the barricade. Target neutralized. Apprehend them now. At the arrest scene, Charles rushed forward, yanking open the truck door. Inside, James Grayson, strapped tightly by the seatbelt, blood streaming down his forehead. Robert raised his gun, shouting, it's over, James. James smirked, his voice hoarse, damn hounds, you win. Charles clenched his fist tightly, then signaled the special ops team. Cuff him. James Grayson is in custody. City Police Station, Charles Mitchell stood outside the interrogation room, arms crossed over his chest. Through the one-way mirror, he could see James Grayson sitting inside, his wrists handcuffed tightly, his face pale from pain. Robert Pierce stepped over, placing a stack of files on the table. He won't say a word without a lawyer. Charles took a deep breath, his gaze icy. He doesn't need to. We already have enough evidence to lock him up for life. Valerie Sanders pushed the door open, her voice firm, Interpol just sent a report. We've tracked down his secret bank accounts. All the money from selling newborns was transferred there. Charles clenched his fists and turned back to look at James through the glass. Then it's over. Everything will end tonight. The door to the interrogation room opened. Charles stepped in, slamming the file onto the table. James Grayson. Charges: murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, forging documents, money laundering. James scoffed, but there was fear flickering in his eyes. You don't have proof. Charles sat down, bracing both hands on the table, his gaze razor sharp. Really? Here's your bank account statements. Here's the list of those who were sold. And here's the testimony from the living witnesses. Charles shoved the file forcefully toward James. James bit his lip, his face turning pale. You think you can take all of us down? Charles tapped his fingers lightly on the table, his voice cold, no. I don't think. I know for sure. James suddenly burst out laughing, but his voice trembled. I'm not afraid of prison, Mitchell. You don't know what I've survived. Charles narrowed his eyes, his voice dripping with contempt. then I'll make sure you survive in prison for as long as possible. James fell silent, the light slowly fading from his eyes. He knew there was no way out this time. At the hospital, Lucy sat by the window, her eyes empty. Mary placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, her voice gentle. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Lucy took a deep breath and turned to look at her mother. "Mom. I want to see him." Mary froze, her eyes widening. "Lucy, are you sure? He's not worth facing." Lucy clenched her hands tightly, her voice trembling but resolute. "I have to end this fear myself." Interrogation room, James looked up as Lucy entered, his eyes filled with surprise. He clearly never thought she would be here at this moment. Deep within his gaze burned a smoldering hatred. Lucy stood in front of him, her eyes glowing with a strength she had never shown before. "What were you thinking when you killed Emma?" James sneered but said nothing. Lucy gritted her teeth, her voice as sharp as a blade. "Did you think I'd be too scared to speak? You were wrong." James shifted back slightly, and for the first time in his life, he felt defeated by a child. I just did what I had to do." Lucy laughed scornfully. "Then I hope you have to live out the rest of your life behind bars." That sentence was like a knife plunging straight into James' pride. Charles nodded at Lucy, his voice gentle. "You did well, Lucy." Lucy smiled faintly. For the first time in months, she felt truly strong. People's Court, the defendant, James Grayson, is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The room erupted in murmurs. Charles clenched his fist, breathing a sigh of relief. Mary pulled Lucy into a tight embrace, tears falling from her eyes this time, tears of joy. "We did it, sweetheart." Lucy looked up at her mother, and for the first time, she smiled a real smile. "We won." James was escorted out, his eyes darkening. He knew he had lost. The prison door slammed shut, closing off his life forever. 1 week later the two infants, Gabriel and Sophia, lay quietly in their cribs. Lucy bent down, gently stroking their hair. "I promise I'll protect you both, always." Mary stood beside her, pride shining in her eyes. "We'll start over together, sweetheart." Lucy smiled, and for the first time, she felt at peace. St. Mary's Hospital, morning sunlight streamed through the white curtains, spreading across the floor. In the small hospital room, the two infants, Gabriel and Sophia, slept peacefully in their cribs. Lucy sat beside them, softly brushing their fine hair, her eyes filled with tenderness. Mary stood next to her, gently placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Sweetheart, have you thought this through?" Lucy took a deep breath, then turned to her mother, her voice steady. "Yes. I want them to stay with us." Mary smiled faintly, though there was a trace of concern in her eyes. Raising a child is never easy, let alone two. Lucy looked down at the babies and whispered, "But if it weren't for me, they wouldn't be alive. Emma gave up everything so they could live. I can't abandon them." Mary gazed at her daughter, her heart swelling with pride. "You've truly grown up, Lucy." Lucy gave a small smile, though it still carried old scars. "I never want anyone to suffer like Emma did." Now, everything had changed. A new life awaited them. 3 months later, at Mary's small house, Gabriel had started babbling his first sounds, his bright eyes gazing at Lucy. Sophia lay in her crib, her tiny hands waving in the air. Lucy held Gabriel in her arms, laughing. "You two just can't stand being apart for a second, can you?" Mary came in from the kitchen, holding a bottle of warm milk. "Children have a special bond that we adults can't always understand." Lucy chuckled, but there was a distant look in her eyes. "Emma protected them with her last breath. I promised myself I would do the same for her." Mary looked at her daughter for a long moment, then set the bottle down and stepped forward to hug Lucy tightly. You don't have to carry everything alone, Lucy. I'll always be here with you. Lucy nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. The pain would always be there, but now, it no longer haunted them. Charles and Valerie, heroes in the shadows, city police station. Charles sat behind his desk, his hand moving over the new case files. Robert walked in and placed a cup of coffee on the table. Working overtime again? Charles gave a faint smile, reaching for the cup. There's still too much to handle. Valerie sat down in the chair opposite him, crossing her legs, her gaze sharp. The James case is over, but there are still other traffickers out there. Charles nodded, his voice lowering. Yeah. But at least this time, we won. Robert chuckled softly. So, we can call this a small victory, right? Charles glanced out the window, where the sunlight was shining over the city. No. This is a big one. They knew justice still had many battles ahead, but at least one evil had been erased. Lucy and the promise to the little angels, a bright morning. Gabriel giggled as Lucy gently tickled his belly. Sophia babbled her first words, her bright eyes looking up at her big sister. Mary stood nearby, her heart full of happiness as she watched the scene before her. Lucy held both babies close, whispering, "I promise I will always protect you." A light breeze passed through, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden behind the house. And somewhere deep inside, Lucy felt like Emma was still watching over them from afar, smiling. This story is proof that justice always exists, no matter how deep the darkness may be. Lucy's courage shows us that even a young girl can stand up against evil and protect those weaker than herself. The persistence of Charles and the police reminds us that crime can never stay hidden forever, and the wicked will always have to pay. In the end, love and compassion are the light that guides those who have endured loss, helping them find happiness again.